We're getting ready to celebrate the grand opening of Longfellow Park. This project really illustrates what can happen when you collaborate. We've got AARP, CPAC, BREC, the city, DPW, all at the table trying to make this whole entire area a better place.
Hi everyone, good morning. Sorry we're a little late. We were all backstage talking and thought everyone was trickling in, but we were having a great time back there. So hopefully we can just bring that conversation out here for you all. Good morning again. My name is Ryan Benton. I'm with Center for Planning Excellence, and I'd like to welcome you again to the 2018 Louisiana Smart Growth Summit. CPEX would like to thank the Capital Area Finance Authority for sponsoring this session. CAFA has been a great supporter and partner over the years, and we're grateful for the support they provide to us and to the Capital Region as a whole. So as Camille, our CEO, said this morning in our introduction, this year's summit is all about issues and diving in headfirst and figuring out solutions to our state's most pressing issues. And we know that takes strong, dedicated leadership at all levels, because many of those issues that we face are difficult to tackle or politically unpopular, and we'll hear about some of those. And just as a side note, while I have this microphone, beyond these 2 days of the Smart Growth Summit, these kind of conversations will live on in our new online magazine, peoplemakingplaces.org. It is live now. We just launched it. It's going to be great, so you should all check it out and subscribe. So whether it's the issue of equality or climate change or preserving culture in small towns, it takes courageous people to make great places, and that's what we'll hear today from this panel. We have 4 leaders here who are working in government and community organizations to find solutions to some of the threats and issues that face their places where they live. But before I introduce today's speakers and we start talking about solutions, I'd like to zoom out a bit and take a moment to talk about the idea of place. So bear with me. For this conversation, we'll define place as a location, a particular spot, or a unique point on a map that, by definition, doesn't exist anywhere else. So when you think about a place that is somewhere that's unique, consider that particular place exists because of all the layers of geography and natural forces and people and culture and all that stuff over time working together or against each other. And that's what creates a place, that combination of elements and time. So consider for a moment an iconic place like the Eiffel Tower in Paris. You know, it's an iconic symbol of Parisian culture. And then there's the Eiffel Tower in Las Vegas. They're both real towers. I think they might even be the same size. They're probably both made out of steel, but only one is really the authentic Eiffel Tower. And that's because it represents and it embodies all of that history that's behind it. So that's a place, right? And it's taken time for it to become what it is and the symbol that it is. So I don't have to tell you, you know, that's the one, and the one in Las Vegas that's a fake, right? So, or you can consider our communities along the Mississippi River or Bayou Lafourche that have developed over time, and the dynamics of those people and those landscapes shaping the water, and the water shaping them and their culture and how they live. And you know, those places are a result of those people in those particular places over long periods of time. However, places aren't static. They're constantly evolving and changing, so we have to consider that. You know, we kind of can't take them for granted as places that will always be as they are. And one could argue that based on this definition, these places can't be easily recreated at the flip of a switch, like that fake Eiffel Tower. They built an Eiffel Tower, but it's not the Eiffel Tower, right? So these great places we have in Louisiana, if they're lost, it's not easy to get them back, or we can't get them back, or at least not the way they were at one point. So the point here, to kind of bring it down to the solution level in these folks, is our Louisiana communities are really valuable for a lot of reasons, and we can't take them for granted. It may seem like great places just kind of happen. They're just there, and they'll always be there. But the reality is it takes a lot of work to keep them going. They're valuable in terms of tourism dollars. They're valuable in terms of the businesses and the commerce and the people who live there. They're valuable in terms of arts and culture and all those kind of intangibles and, you know, historic buildings and all that great stuff. Some of those things that are harder to put a dollar sign next to. So with that, I'd like to introduce you very quickly to 4 people who are doing great things to protect and enhance the places they love and call home. And I'll briefly introduce them all, and they'll come up here and speak and tell you more about themselves and their backgrounds and the work they're doing. So our first speaker is Greg Lemons. He's the mayor of Abita Springs, and he has been since 2013. He's a lifelong resident of the town. Mayor Lemons has taken the hard position and advocated to keep fracking out of Abita Springs and has set a goal for the town to be run by 100% renewable energy by 2035. We'll talk more about that. Kate Durio leads the CREATE initiative in Lafayette, which is a comprehensive strategy to incorporate culture, recreation, entertainment, arts, tourism, and economy into all city parish efforts. So I think that's everything. Sounds like a tough job, but can't wait to hear more. George Marks is the president and director of Nunu Arts and Culture Collective, which is a meeting place for visual artists, writers, musicians, and cultural ambassadors from Arnaville and the surrounding region. And George is also an artist in his own right. Lastly, we'll hear from Phanat Xanamane, who was in the air a few minutes ago, so we're happy he made it here just in time. He's an urban designer and co-founder and creator of Envision, which is an organization in New Iberia that initiates community revitalization projects such as produce markets and access to fresh food and public arts festivals. So with that, I will turn it over to Mayor Lemons.
Good morning. I'd like to thank CPEC for inviting me to speak here and tell a little bit about the town of Abita Springs. But before I go into it, I got to tell you a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Abita Springs. I actually literally was born there. I was born in my grandmother's house. And then I went away for a while. I went away for 36 years. I came back home to retire. I worked for a Fortune 500 company where I traveled and worked and lived all over the world. I found out that the United States is the best country in the world. Abita Springs is a great place to be from. So when I came back in 2003, I got involved in public service. I was in the planning and zoning for a couple years. I was a alderman. I was mayor pro tem, and I've been mayor for 6 years. So this is a passion of my life, this town and this community. My daughters are there. My granddaughters are there. My great-grandson is there. My grandson is there. So that's home to me, as well as many cousins and many relatives. I'd like to recognize somebody in this audience right now. My finance department is out there, Nikki Mindo. She's also my finance director. So a little bit about Abita Springs. Abita Springs is not a very big community. In fact, it's a relatively small. It comes under a state law called the Larson Act. It is considered to be a town, under 5,000 residents. We're actually about 2,800 is our total residents, 1,300 households. So it's a small community. We are considered a bedroom community. We don't have a whole bunch of industry. And guess what? We don't have a whole bunch of money. So money's tight for us. Money's really tight. We kind of live off of property taxes. So there's a lot of issues in the town of Abita Springs. First year I took over, we found out that there was a 60,000 acres leased by a big landowner to oil company for fracking. At that time, I didn't know very much about fracking. I said, you know, this might be a good thing for Abita, but I need to do a little bit of homework. So I went around and started doing homework on the fracking industry. All the time, my constituents were saying, you know, we really don't want that there. And I kind of blew them off as being tree huggers. And more people approached me and said, hey, this is a problem. This is a problem all over. So the first thing I did is I went up to Demick, Pennsylvania. I don't know if you've all heard about that, but that's where natural gas seeps up through the aquifer, and you turn on your kitchen sink, and you can light it on fire. That's not on TV. I saw it. I was in the same kitchen with the family that had bottled water stacked up there, and their kitchen faucet was on fire. Pretty heart-wrenching. So then I said, okay, well, that's maybe just a one-off. I need to go someplace else and find out about this. So I went up to North Louisiana. That's kind of close to home. They talk about how good it is up there. Well, I went up there and I saw the major compressors and the noise and the problems that were caused by the denuding of all the trees and the pollutions in the streams. And I said, well, maybe they got an idea here. Maybe there's a problem with this. So then we went to Denton, Texas. Denton, Texas tried to do an ordinance to prohibit fracking in their community. I said, maybe that's something Abita wants to do. All the time, my constituents are telling me, you got to do this, you got to do that. So I saw a fracking site in Denton, Texas. I went on the second floor of a house 100 yards away, and I looked over to a fracking site. And I saw folks walking around with respirators and Tyvek suits, and there was a playground less than 100 yards away with kids playing in it. That's a problem. So I came back with the help of two-lane environmental law. We took the oil company and the landowner to court. Actually, we took them to 4 courts. We didn't win the war, but we won the battle. They decided that it was not feasible to do fracking in those 60,000 acres. So we kind of had a little stay-off for it. Well, anyway, I got to thinking about, well, yeah, sustainable energy, what does that mean? You know, we have finite resources. Our oil and gas is finite. In the years to come, it won't be there. So what do we have to do? Where do we have to go? And of course, I'm in July in South Louisiana, and the sun's beating down on me. And I said, whoa, we got a lot of sun here, don't we? Not today, but we have a lot of sun. So I said, solar energy is probably something we need to do. So we partnered with a Sierra group called Ready for 100, where you become energy sustainable by a specific date. Now, I don't quite know what that means yet. We're learning that. But I do know it's an elephant. And I did learn something in my 36 years of traveling. How do you eat the elephant? You eat it one bite at a time. So we've been doing our 1 bites at a time, or sustainable energy. So we're moving to a goal of being the town of Abita Springs being 100% sustainable energy. We're also making it easier for our residents to have solar power on their homes. Hopefully, within this year, in this next month, I'll have 188 solar panels on our town hall. That will provide 60% of our electricity for that building. Now, of course, it doesn't provide night energy. The battery technology is not there, but we're working towards it. I learned something in the business world. You sell your product, you take your money that you make off your product, and you invest it back into R&D, and you have a better product. And that's what's happened to the solar energy, and that's what happened to the battery energy. We just put up 4 EV charging stations in our community. Tesla Corporation gave us EV charging for electric vehicle charging. That's all part of that elephant. So we're moving to the all energy sustainability. We're working with our energy companies to have a community solar. Hopefully we'll have a community solar program within the next 5 years. Big investment, but these energy companies have to move away from fossil fuels. So that's kind of our little journey. That's a little bit about Abita Springs. We're a small town. And if we can do it in Abita Springs, we can set example for everybody, which is why I kind of partnered with Sierra Club, to get that word out, to say, hey, Abita Springs, this little small Mayberry community, can move towards energy independence. Anybody can do it. We're not Mayberry because we don't have a police department. But so that's a little bit about me. That's a little bit about where we're going. We're not there yet by any means. Do we have pushback? Absolutely. As an elected official, I get a lot of pushback. Social media, sometimes at town meetings, public meetings, but the majority of the community is moving towards this, and they understand for our future we got to do more than what we've been doing. So thank you all very much for listening to me, And I'll look forward to any questions that are out there. Thank you.
Good morning. So I also am from the Lafayette area. I'm from Opelousas originally. I moved away to go to journalism school at a top 10 program in the country in Oregon. Worked for a CBS station there for a couple years and then felt the pull to come back to Lafayette. So I worked for the Downtown Development Office for about 5 years, and about a year and a half ago, I began working for the mayor. He said, I have this crazy idea that I want to develop this acronym that he came up with, which was CREATE, standing for Culture, Recreation, Entertainment, Arts, Tourism, Economy. And if you don't know my boss, he's Mayor President Joel Robideau of Lafayette Parish, and he served in the House for 12 years, was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and was a CPA originally. So he says he had a midlife crisis when he decided to run for the House. So I don't know what you call running for mayor, but just more of that craziness. But how do I do that? Okay, so in Lafayette, you're right, it is a tough job. We have nothing but potential in Lafayette. We have so many things to work with. We're the home of free festivals and free weekly concert series. I mean, Alive After 5 really kind of worked with our Downtown Alive program to kind of learn how to do that. And so this is actually from a Downtown Alive, and I just love this couple because they were just like having the best time, I think. But our built environment doesn't really doesn't really reflect who we are as a community culturally. So in the downtown office, I worked there for 5 years, and I did a program called Creativity Everywhere. And it started out very small. I was the marketing director, so I used my very measly $8,000 annual budget for marketing. And instead of purchasing ads and hiring an ad agency, I started doing public art around downtown Lafayette. And so some of these are part of that. The mural with Adrian Fulton standing with his arms out at Kirk's Anita Butcher was part of that program. The sculptures in the top center were part of that program. But we also had a lot of really beautiful murals already to work with. But this was all part of just trying to make our built environment reflect more of that cultural identity. And so over the course of about 3 years, we ended up with over $25,000 a year to put into public art, and we earned in that time a little over $800,000 worth of earned media. So it worked, basically. The idea was that in using advertising money to invest in real infrastructure change and putting money into arts in our community, we could get better reach than we could by buying advertising, and so it actually works. So I encourage you to do the same thing. But in thinking about how we did everything from those little cloth banners that people put on light poles, we found out how much those cost, and we worked with a local artist, and he did them for the same amount, and that money got to stay in the community. So just wanted to share that a little bit, because even though I'm not doing that work anymore, specifically in the downtown, I did want to kind of share that because it's a platform for kind of how we're approaching CREATE through a place-based approach. So we have this great food, we have music, we have all of these great festivals and things that happen, but we found out that our cultural economy is our number two economy in Lafayette Parish, but we also realized that that happened very organically. And so the idea with CREATE was, what could we do with a little bit of strategy and a little bit of investment? And just as a reminder, I work for a CPA, so you're going to hear a lot about return on investment. So this was another part of Creativity Everywhere. It was probably our biggest contribution. This is a sculpture that I designed, and we crowdfunded for Parks on CC, which is our most used and loved park in Lafayette, downtown Lafayette. And so these are 7-foot-tall concrete letters that allow you to stand in the middle and be the Y in Lafayette. And the idea was, what makes Lafayette so special? Why is Lafayette so special? And it comes down to the people. So over the course of the last almost 4 years, the sign's almost 4 years old, we've had weddings, proposals, we've had candlelight vigils, we've had celebrations there, and it's painted about every 2 to 4 weeks. Different organizations or artists will repaint it to reflect kind of what's going on in the community. So already kind of went over what the acronyms are. So we get asked this question a lot, like why now? Like Lafayette's been doing great. That's what people always say. Lafayette's awesome. We want to be there. But in 2015 and 2016, we actually led the country in job losses when the price of oil dropped. And that was actually the turning point for my boss, the mayor, to say, well, what do we do to further diversify ourselves from oil and gas? And so that's kind of why we're looking to do that. So it's not the first time that Lafayette has called upon its culture to diversify its economy. Back in the 1980s, when the bottom really fell out, we were about 80% reliant on oil and gas, and now we're closer to 33%. But some will argue that's not enough, including all the people that lost their jobs in 2015 and 16. We also, just for reference, got hit with a bit of a 1-2 punch. 2015 and 16 were when everybody was unemployed, and 2016, of course, is when we also had a flood where over 5,000 people lost everything in that flood. And so it was been a tough time in Lafayette, but we're pulling through. So just like before, we've turned to our culture to diversify that. And so back in 1968, we founded Codafil, and that's an agency, a statewide agency, is celebrating 50 years this year, and that's based out of Lafayette. Back in 1974, we founded Festivals Acadiana Creole, which is now, up and running, and we just had it a couple weeks ago. 1986, Festival International came, and now we have 400,000 visitors that come to Lafayette every April. And 2007, of course, we put in LUS Fiber. And so with Create, we like to think about what is going to be this generation's contribution that for decades later, generations are continuing to stand on the shoulders of and reap the benefits of that vision. And so we hope that Create can help to be that vision. So like I said, 1980s, 70% of Lafayette's economy was dependent on the energy sector, and today that's about 32%. My numbers are a little off. But we continue to need to do more. So we're lucky in that we don't have to look very far to find a city that is comparable to us, both culturally and geographically. We always say we never want to be New Orleans, but we love that we have New Orleans. But we have a lot to learn from them. So in 2010, they launched their own cultural economy office, and they, ever since then, every year have done a cultural snapshot. So we're getting into the ROI kind of metrics of Create. But they've been tracking everything from cultural jobs and about what cultural workers are making. And just a quick point to make, the difference between a tourism worker and a cultural worker is that without a strong cultural product, you don't have a tourism industry. And so for Lafayette, it's really critical for us to protect and preserve the authenticity of our culture and not cheapen or Disneyfy it for the sake of trying to get more tourists, because we know that we'll actually lose out in that direction. So we've studied what the snapshot's done in New Orleans and kind of the metrics that they've been tracking and how they've been doing that. And so you can see that their cultural economy went up from number 2 to number 1 in just 6 years that they've been doing this initiative. And so it's definitely something to pay attention to for us. So we started really slow. We really tried to engage the community. We're going to get to this in a second, but we had an election last November that rededicated a portion of property taxes towards Create and back to the flooding. We can't separate ourselves because we were actually on a dual ballot measure last November. So there was a surplus in our public health millage, and so the mayor put on the ballot that we would rededicate a one-time $9 million investment into drainage, and then an annual investment of $2.5 million from the public health millage to drainage, and then a $500,000 annual investment into Create. And so we started last June. Between June and November of last year, I had about 425 individual meetings with different people about Create and what it could do for them. And I wanted to be in every ballet school and every Little League soccer team, every church, and really kind of going to where people are, which is kind of a novel idea, it turns out, in public service. So people were really into kind of learning that. So we started just also doing a lot of reporting and looking in research. So we wanted to synthesize other resources, get a lot of public input and outreach. We have monthly stakeholder meetings and committees. We work with groups by going to them. Again, that's very critical and important. Establishing and managing cultural districts. We did a cultural economic impact study in 2017. We also we're going to kind of go through some of these. I'll kind of skip. So this is the funding that we had. So we didn't have any. We don't have any money except for this year through Create, and we have that through 2025. And so with our impact study, we decided that we wanted an investment strategy and a return on investment calculator. And so we're developing those things. And right now, the investment calculator will be done probably spring of next year. And the idea is that this is something we will internally use as well as provide publicly. So if anybody's coming to us for funding, we want them to be able to plug their own information in and see what their return on investment is to the broader community, and know that we will be using that to measure our willingness to participate or partner, and also so that other organizations can strengthen their sponsorship packages and their reporting out to people who have invested in them to show what their impact has been in the community. So trying to relate the arts for art's sake and trying to bring that into the numbers and metrics and impact, and giving the organizations the tools that they need to tell that story. So the thing that I was most adamant about and really the most proud of is that we're implementing a parish-wide asset inventory. So everything from individual musicians, individual artists, rehearsal venues, performance venues, restaurants, chefs, people that maintain and repair musical instruments, ballet shoes, all the gamut. This is just a taste of some of the categories that we're counting here. K through 12 educational programs, French immersion teachers in schools. Everything within the parish that touches parks or recreation or culture is going to be included in this asset inventory. It's going to live in sort of an open data portal. So again, learning from other cities. New Orleans has an asset mapping that's based on GIS, and it's kind of cumbersome to use, but very helpful. I'm glad they have it. But a lesson to us that we wanted ours to be a little bit more user-friendly. Austin, we met with their cultural affairs office. They handed me a spiral-bound catalog asset inventory, and I was like, great, let's not do this. This is dated the minute that they printed this. We want ours to be crowdsourced and up-to-date as to the minute that you print that information. We have been having these monthly meetings. Again, it's back to the assets and promoting. In Lafayette, we don't have a shortage of things. We have a lack of awareness of things. And so the asset inventory is directly addressing that. But these meetings that we have, we go out to different areas in the community so that people who may not have ever visited our food hub or may have not ever visited the greenhouse can go in and see what's kind of going on there. So that's been really successful. We hosted the Solo Songwriters Festival and Workshop this year in May, and we're bringing it back next year. This is a partnership with the Buddy Holly Educational Foundation. They've hosted this songwriting workshop in London for the last 10 years. They've never hosted in the US, and they decided to come to Lafayette this year. And so the story, I could go on for an hour and a half about the stories from this thing. Our local musicians were attended on scholarship, and they're going to Nashville and recording, London and recording. They're being featured in festivals and headlining. And these are songwriters that didn't really understand yet the power of songwriting. And so cultivating that workforce and development. And again, it's back to return on investment. When you're a musician playing for Friday night, you're not building the kind of legacy wealth for your kids and grandkids the way that songwriting and intellectual property can do. And so we're trying to get musicians and artists to start thinking in those ways. We also hosted the International Music Cities Convention. It was in Memphis last year. I got to see my friend Tommy here, who's here last year for that. But that was just a couple weeks ago here in Lafayette, and we're still exploring kind of some of the lessons that we have to learn there, and it's been a real catalyst for us in getting our music community organized and engaged and really excited about what we can do with Create for music specifically as a music city. One of the other big wins that we're excited about through Create is we partnered with our travel office, and we're doing finally a comprehensive community calendar for Lafayette. So typically, I know your city is probably similar. Media companies have tried to have the most populated calendar, but something falls short, or you can't always depend on it to have everything. And so the travel office, we're working with them, and so the idea is that this calendar will live on an iframe that can be hosted on any website. So the media company can host the same calendar that the travel website's hosting, that Parks and Rec is hosting, and then for the user, you can just filter down events. So if you're looking for an event this Saturday outside that's free, that involves food, that I can bring my kid to, you can filter down that information in the calendar and find it. So it's not so overwhelming. The other benefit is that if you're hosting an event, which we have a lot of those in Lafayette, then you only have to send it to one source, and then it appears on all of the places that this calendar is hosted. So it's streamlining and working smarter, not harder, and getting everybody kind of on the same page. We hosted the Louisiana Seafood Cook-Off 2 years in a row, and that's Chef Ryan Trahan. If you're in Lafayette, I highly encourage you to go to the Blue Dog Cafe. He just took over there, and he is not only the Louisiana Seafood King, but he just became the American Seafood King. The last chef to do that from Louisiana was John Besh, so we have high hopes for Ryan Trahan here in Lafayette. We are also establishing a cultural ambassador program. And so what this is we had this horror story of someone being in a hotel and asking a clerk what was going on in Lafayette, and the hotel clerk was like, there's nothing ever happening in Lafayette. And we all know that's not true. So we decided that we would start this cultural ambassador leadership program for people who are working on the front lines: Uber drivers, taxi drivers, airport workers, restaurant workers, hotel workers, anybody that is touching a tourist or a visitor, or really the public, just to equip them with where to go to find information and the tools to share. So we're working with our tourism office on that program, and also our Leadership Institute of Acadiana. We're also working with our university, which has been a little challenging but very rewarding when it works out. But we're doing a summer educational tourism program. So the idea would be over the summer you can come to a 2-week program about food, a 2-week program about music, and a 2-week program or 4-week program on French. And so the idea is that in the mornings you're in classes, and then in the afternoon you're actually going on cultural experiences. So we'll take you on a swamp tour, we'll take you to eat at a restaurant, we'll take you on a Cajun food tour, we'll take you to Arnaville to see Nunu's, we'll take you to New Iberia to see what Phanat's up to. So the idea is to just kind of provide this learning experience with cultural experience. If you don't know this, educational tourism is the #1 growing faction of tourism worldwide. People want to go on a trip and come back better or smarter than they left. And so we're really trying to capitalize on that by providing these package services. So you'll pay one price, and your food, lodging, and tuition is all paid for. You just have to get yourself there and pay the package, and then it's covered. For the French piece, this will be credits that a college student can actually use. So that's another benefit. But we have a lot of people who are young professionals in Lafayette that want to speak French, but they can't go to St. Anne's, or they can't go to France for a couple weeks. And so this is an option that they can do in their own backyard and maybe get to be a little bit more French friendly. We've hosted, we had a Logique this year, which is a young Quebecois from Canada who worked in our office and helped us on our French-friendly efforts. We just hosted Xanamane, which is an international filmmaking lab. We had 50 filmmakers come to Lafayette from all over the world. Together, they made 23 films together. So I'm getting the stop. So I can go on and on and on, but I want to just say thank you, and I'll turn it over to George.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for having me here today. My name is George Marks. I'm from a little town called Arnaville, population of about 1,200. I moved back. I didn't travel as much as everyone else here on the panel. The farthest I went was Baton Rouge. I lived here for about 13 years, traveled around a bit, but moved back about 15 years ago. What I returned to was a place that didn't look like the place that I had left. A lot of the stores had closed. There were about 9 empty storefronts. There was a lot of illegal kind of activity happening along the roadways. And I decided if I was going to live there, I was going to have to do something about it. And so I gathered up a group of friends and family members, and we started addressing some of the common issues in town. Our local government wasn't doing anything about it. Our parish governments weren't doing anything about it. So we decided to do it ourselves. So we adopted a act first, apologize later attitude. And we apologized a lot because we upset a lot of people for doing what we're doing, because everyone wanted to know, like, who gave us permission. Well, we gave ourselves permission to take the initiative and do it on our own. One of we called it the Arnaville experiment. And so one of the things that we realized was that we really didn't know what we were doing. We just knew that it felt right. And I think that to a certain degree that kind of helped us because we didn't know that we were necessarily making mistakes, and those mistakes we learned from. Once we realized and once we started to understand the power of what we were doing, we then realized that communities surrounding Orneville also had the same problems. They had local governments that were either disinterested or didn't know how to help. They had a local population that just kind of didn't feel like they were part of the system in any way, or that they had a say in how things would move forward. And so we decided, by working with these neighboring communities, to develop, it's called Corridor des Arts, the Arts Corridor. Because a lot of small communities in this area don't have any zoning or any codes that address what their communities look like, a lot of times what you might find growing in your neighbor's yard is a car or an abandoned car or debris or trash or whatever. And so we took the idea of the corridor and we celebrated that. We took the idea of an abandoned corridor as being a corridor, and that abandoned thing became a symbol for connecting all of these communities. So the idea of taking something negative and turning it into something positive is what our mission is all about, right? It's something that we really want to celebrate. And my phone's going to keep kind of clicking off, but all my information's on here. So the first thing that we started doing was along Corridor des Arts, we looked at Interstate 10 and Interstate 49 as being two access points to all of these communities. And we decided that, because of this, why not work together? So the communities of Henderson, Cecilia, Orneville, Frozard, Grand Coteau, and Sunset. There was no reason why these communities could not work together to celebrate their local, authentic culture. Have you heard of, someone ever say STP? Anyone? Same 10 people? It's always like the same 10 people that always are doing everything, right? Well, if we take these 6 communities, if we take these 6 communities and we identified STP within every single one of those communities, all of a sudden we have, 60 people that we could work with together to identify issues and find common creative solutions to those problems. So the components of our vision statement, in regards to corridor, we knew that we wanted to share artistic expression within every one of these communities. We knew that we wanted to highlight the cultural components and heritage in every one of those communities. We knew that we wanted to foster and encourage appreciation of artists and self-expression in all of these places, and incorporate artistic self-expression in the daily lives of residents and activities within these communities. Once we met with groups within each one of the communities, it was actually through Gay Hamilton sitting out there right now. She's the former director of the Cultural Districts program with the state. They offered a program called Creative Communities, and Orneville was a recipient of one of those for the Corridor des Arts program. So it provided us an opportunity to meet with groups within every community and to talk to them about what made their place special and also what were some of the common issues. And some of the things that we learned was that, art is an opinion. It's not, some folks consider what I do, I paint cotton balls. They don't see it as necessarily artful, but my opinion, it is, right? So that it's a self-expression, that everyone is an artist or is artistic in some capacity, that there's sensory sensitivity and expression that art includes both professionally trained and also self-taught artists, that originality is important, and that handmade items are equally as important. We learned that there's a certain kind of elitism that is connected to the arts, and so we wanted to work to try to mitigate that in some capacity. And then we also learned that artists wanted to be identified by the product that they were producing. For example, visual artists wanted to be known as a visual artist, culinary, music, dance, folk, literary, storytelling, mixed media, metalwork, woodworking, you get the point. The idea is artists that don't want to be put into one group and called just that. They wanted to be identified by the product they were producing. We then looked at what were the community assets within each of these communities. Eddie Caziu he's going to kill me, but he's sitting in the audience. That is a community asset because he lives near Cecilia, near Poche Bridge. The wealth of information this man has inside of his head is phenomenal. So he's an asset to the Poche Bridge and to the Cecilia communities and also to the whole of Acadiana, and Kate can speak to that also. We looked at the scenic, the fact that there were scenic back roads. That is a cultural asset that removes people basically from just driving on the interstate. If we could figure a way of getting people off the interstate and driving along these back roads, then we were onto something, all right? So we looked at things that were not very obvious. We know that there are artists that live there. We know that, but we wanted to count them. We know that there are public spaces that people can experience or plug into along these places, but we wanted to really focus on the people that live within these communities. They're the real asset. Our goals and our strategies connected to this, we knew that we wanted to focus on a marketing campaign to really brand the area as a cultural region, and to look at this corridor as being one quadrant, 1/4 of what could happen in the Acadiana region. We knew that once we succeeded in doing what we wanted to do, that we could duplicate that by mirroring it in another quadrant, and that our goal was to eventually connect all the quadrants to form one cultural loop around Acadiana. Lafayette is our cultural hub. Everything we're doing is surrounding Lafayette, and that it feeds right back into that community. Kate and I often joke that what's good for Lafayette is good for Orneville, what's good for Orneville is good for Lafayette, and it's true. If we all help each other and we all partner together within these communities, we're able to kind of connect those STPs within each one of these places, to share resources, to share ideas, and to partner together to make a much more authentic, creative place in the Acadiana region. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm glad to be here today. I didn't think I was going to make it. As Ryan alluded to earlier, I was in the air about an hour ago, and I flew in from a three-week trip in Southeast Asia in Australia, and landed here safely in Baton Rouge just an hour ago. So very happy to be here. So my name's Phanat Xanamane. Like I mentioned, I was in Southeast Asia, and I was visiting the motherland, as we say, and the home of my mother and my father in Laos, which is a small landlocked country in Southeast Asia. And my mother and I went to her little village where she grew up, and her hometown where she spent her sort of formative years, and she is a very incredible woman. So she has like what would equate to a second grade education here in America. She quit school in second grade to help out her family, to go sell things at the market in the village where she's from, and help raise money for the family and bring that home and whatnot. And following the Vietnam War conflict, after she had gotten married and everything, she escaped Laos and political persecution and economic poverty, escaped Laos to go into Thailand, and settled in a refugee camp there where I was born in 1981, and eventually made her way over to the United States after spending a lot of time in the refugee camps and going through the process of being sponsored here in the States. And our family eventually settled in 1981 in the New Iberia, Louisiana. And it's currently a city of about 30,000 people. And the parish is about 70,000 people. And I grew up there all the way through college, and I went to school for architecture at the University of Louisiana. Eddie Caziu was one of my professors. And following that, I went to New York City to pursue my graduate education in urban design and architecture at Columbia University. And you know, that time in Columbia, studying cities and looking at communities and the systems that help shapes the systems that help shape communities was really a sort of formative time for me as a urban thinker, and I got a lot of experience. Stayed in New York for a while, about 5 years, getting experiences with artists, working with public artists and designers, landscape architects, planners, and in a very interdisciplinary environment. So we worked with ecosystem scientists, economists, historians, and you know, after that time, decided I wanted to come back to New Iberia, and there was just, I don't know, there was no really logic to it. You know, I didn't have a real plan, but I said to myself, I'm gonna come back to Louisiana, spend 10 years of my life, just basically give up my 30s, a decade, to try to bring all of these experiences and what I've learned about communities to help my hometown. And I grew up in a part of New Iberia called the West End, which is predominantly an African-American community, and about 80% African-American, and very high poverty rates. I grew up in a neighborhood that had about well, right now it has about a $20,000 median household income, which is right above the poverty level, and you have a lot of, you know, federally subsidized housing projects and stuff like that, and so the community has been, you know, growing up there was really, I didn't know any better. I thought it was a fine place to grow up, but coming back was very sort of jarring, really, and seeing sort of how the community has declined over the years was very shocking to see. You know, we're sort of almost like a bedroom community to Lafayette, which is about 30 miles north of us, and a lot of the young people, you know, for the past few decades, go to Lafayette to study, and there's just more opportunities for young people in Lafayette. So the town was really stagnating for many decades, and a lot of in the neighborhood, you know, there was no new industries coming in, and new ideas coming in. And when I came back in New Iberia in 2010, it was very the community, I would say, was very cynical at that point, and the narrative surrounding this community was very just negative. You know, New Iberians can talk for 10 minutes about just all the negative things about the city, and maybe spend 30 seconds on something positive. So I knew that was a huge issue within the community, but I had to sort of come back and, you know, start from square one and really investigate and find out what was going on. So next slide, please. There were many things that I had to sort of find out, and whenever I landed on the ground there and started to sort of dig around in my old neighborhood and find out what was what were the issues, I started to organize, you know, with a friend of mine, organize a series of community meetings, neighborhood meetings, just saying like, okay, we're thinking of doing this like installation, and just to sort of raise awareness about neighborhood issues and bring people together to talk about what can possibly change, and sort of visualize it together. And so we came up with, in 2011, we came up with a temporary public art installation, which each week dedicated itself to a kind of public space that tackled a specific issue that the community wanted to address. So the first week was public health and wellness. The second week was markets and local economy. The third week was arts and culture. Fourth was transportation, so on and so forth. For the sake of time, I'm just going to talk about one of those themes, which is well, kind of two, public health and wellness and local economy. So at the top of the screen here, you see a sketch from summer 2011. So this is sort of how the idea of how a creative place would begin to emerge and how we could start to talk about it. So I just created this sketch, with Photoshop, took an image of an empty lot in the neighborhood, and said, "How about we just plug in a market and some sort of, iconic architectural sort of element in there," and then we worked with the community to actually plan something to happen, and we worked with the LSU School of Architecture to create this temporary installation, and in fall 2011 made that happen. And then during that process, we got together with people in the community, invited people, stakeholders, city officials, local residents to talk about how can we make these things more permanent, like something like a farmer's market more permanent in this neighborhood. And between 2011 and 2016, it took a lot of trust building in the community, a lot of work in terms of building other parts and building the foundation of this project, of a project that would sustain a market, basically. So finally, in 2016, we've got all the pieces lined up to where we got investors on board, private investors, and the resources all together in a pot to make something happen. We got a piece of property that was donated to us, and then we moved on to planning and designing that out. So sketch in November 2016 at the bottom of the page there, and then finally in the summer of 2017 the actual market materializing. Next slide. So I'm just gonna roll through these slides. So that's the interior of the market here. That shows a space in the community where there's basically no other businesses around that sell local produce or fresh produce. So you can almost consider this neighborhood a kind of a food desert. Next slide. And these are some of the growers and the farmers that are involved with the project. The gentleman in the center there is Carl Cooper Jr. He's the manager of the project and the current president of Envision the Berry. The Berry is a nickname for New Iberia. I can't remember if I mentioned that. Next slide. So that space has been a sort of, a creative, in terms of creative placemaking, it's been a kind of hub or a point of departure for many other kinds of creative placemaking activities. We've held festivals, parades in front of this market. Next slide. We've held sort of like these farm-to-table dinners to bring people from outside of the neighborhood to sort of introduce them to the local food movement that's been happening. Next slide. It's also been a space for young entrepreneurs and neighborhood residents to be able to consign or sell their own creative products like baked goods or next slide, or jewelry that they make in this space. And I mentioned earlier there was like this sort of like 4-year period where all of this foundation work had to happen. So in order to be able to sell fresh produce, we had to first grow it. And so this is a project that we did a sort of community garden. We have a series of a network of community gardens within the neighborhood. This is one is in a public housing site. Next slide. We have 2 big greenhouses in the neighborhood that serve as sort of the sort of flagship for this local food growing your own food kind of movement in New Iberia. Next slide. That's a shot of the community garden at the public housing site. Next slide. Another shot. Next slide. And so it's been a great way to sort of bring different parts of the community together and have people interact and build trust and relationships within the community. Next slide. This is another image of the market. Next slide. And so, it's been a great space to begin to reclaim the narrative of New Iberia and of the Black community in New Iberia, and to sort of reframe it through the lens of the African American experience. And Carl has been, the manager, has been a really positive voice in that narrative. Next slide. There's also space to display local art. Next slide. Space for other kinds of activities. We have a bike share program that we've started, and a bike repair and share program that we started as well for youth in the community. There's lots of interactions like this would never ever happen on Hopkins Street, but having this space and using it to create these I'm getting the stop sign, so I'm just going to rush through these next slides. Next one. Opportunities for local chefs to also use the local foods to highlight their talents. Next slide. Oh, thanks. And just moving on to the next phase, and how local residents, I live in a neighborhood, so local residents like myself are trying to bring in, trying to build on this sort of cultural economy, and that's based on food, is to, we've signed up for the WOOF program, where volunteers from around the world come, and I also converted part of my house into Airbnb, so that, and that's been amazing to see people from all around the world that come specifically to this neighborhood because of the gardens that are there and what's happening in this neighborhood, and they want to be part of that, and they want to experience that. And so that's sort of where we're at in New Iberia in this one particular project, but there's so much more that I wish I could talk about, but I think we'll say that for another time.
Great. Are our mics on? Great. Thank you, guys. So I have a lot of questions. We have 20-ish minutes. I've got one I think that you could all answer. Mayor Lemons, you talked about how to eat an elephant, one bite at a time. You mentioned, the energy sustainability is one elephant. I'm curious, what are your elephants? They could be current elephants or future elephants. Like, what are the big challenges, kind of at this point in your work or your progress? What do you see as being a challenge or impeding you, or something that's come up that you didn't think would be an issue? So, whoever wants to go first.
Well, we talked about the energy sustainability, and that is certainly a big elephant. But one of the other things is we don't have a master plan in Abita Springs. We don't have a direction, so we don't know where we're going to go to get there. That's a big part of something that we're now beginning to have a conversation about. There's a lot of different theories on this. It can be led from within. It can be led from without. It can be given to you in a package. So we're in the process of discussing that. Of course, you have to finance that. That's another set of issues, and we're in the budget year right now to put together a plan, to put together a master plan for the town of Abita Springs. More than just an idea of zoning. It's got to be traffic involved. It's got to be our downtown area involved. Growth. We have a growth rate of about 8%, but we're going to have another growth rate pretty quick. We have to manage that growth. We also have economic development that needs to be part. So that's our next elephant that's sitting out there. Energy sustainability is here, but planning is another big part of that.
Great. You have to have a vision to get. You have to know where you're going, right?
Correct.
Yeah, for us, it's about awareness. That was probably our biggest challenge, in that we have all of these great things happening, and so the calendar and the asset inventory are two ways that we're trying to get there. But we realize, and like George and Phanat and I talk about, what's good for them is good for us, and vice versa. this is a model that like any community can adopt, right? Is just like making your community more aware of what's already going on and how to access those things. So whether that's a person looking for something to do, or if that's a restaurant that wants to start featuring visual arts or music in their facility, you can do that through this asset inventory. So those are two big things that we're looking into, and awareness plays into diversifying the idea of Lafayette. We're more than just Cajun in Lafayette, and we've ridden that wave for a long time. But we have a lot of communities that are not represented, that are not reflected in that branding, and it's I feel like we have a responsibility as a community to do a better job of that.
So for me, it's within all of these communities. We started this project in 2012, and it's taken all this time to get to the point where we're at. And it's because of the borders that exist within communities, or those perceived borders that exist within communities. And it's working with them to try to kind of break those down, those barriers that exist between us. And and we're having to do it within the business community, within the with regular individuals who live there. But the biggest part is with the governmental sector. So it's really trying to work with the governmental sector to get them to understand that we're stronger together, and that it's nice to have good, healthy competition within communities, but in the end, we all have to work together.
I think for me, it's been the big elephant that I had to work on in the past 8 years has been the trust building in the community, and just getting, especially within this community where it has a history of being marginalized and sort of taken advantage of in the past, and there's a lot of distrust to sort of overcome. It took really just 2 years of being consistently engaging and doing work in there until people finally thought I was serious about my 10-year commitment. And now that I'm sort of going into the last 2 years of that 10-year commitment, it's about, the big elephant is really about transferring that brain trust, building that brain trust and that organizational capacity over to a new group of leaders within the neighborhood to sort of carry the torch.
Great.
Can we have more than one elephant?
Yes, you can have a whole. I don't know
Building
what
on what
you call a
Phanat was
group of
saying,
elephants.
and also building on what Kate was saying, there are 18 different French dialects in the state of Louisiana, and there's really only one big one that everyone knows about, and that's the Cajun culture. And so it's a lot of those minority groups, like within the state, that are not being represented, and that's another huge elephant, I think, that a huge challenge that we have to address.
Any more elephants? There's something I heard, we've got kind of two groups here. You guys are working from within government, and you guys are working, hopefully, will be working with government, right? Outside of government. And it was making me think of a lot of the work we do at CPEX. We have to demonstrate something, like why it's important. It could be, and we do a lot of complete streets demonstrations, like why put a bike lane, or why build a park here, why, and we physically show it. One, so people understand what it is, but also to get people on board. So you have to get that buy-in from the community, whether you're talking about energy or kind of figuring out how all these this clearinghouse for culture works, or getting buy-in from elected officials or community leaders. So what kind of issues have you seen there, or what can you speak to that kind of model? It seems something that's kind of you kind of have to prove yourselves, right?
Yeah, I think it's more than just proving. Yeah, it's proving yourself, but also it's a tool for community bonding. Really, really using the work of artists, music, food to bring people together, and then make it experiential, create an experience among people in the community, and so that they can share and reflect on that. And that's what community building is all about, and that's why creative placemaking, I think that's sort of the core of creative placemaking, using the arts and culture to really create experience that tap into the soul, into the soul of that community and all the individuals in it.
So for us, because of through creative placemaking, you want to identify different groups that you partner with, and for us, it's the governmental sector. It's of course the nonprofit sector, because that's what I do. The education, the business community, and also residents. And we learned early on that our economic development folks really didn't necessarily buy in to what we were doing. And so through an event called Semaine de la Francophonie, we actually pulled them in and had them present. And the idea was, if they don't believe what we're saying, we're going to put them on the spot and let them do their own research. And by doing their own research, they'll learn about what is really happening. And they did. And so I told Phanat this a long time ago, it's about having a seat at the table. So we asked them directly, how do we get a seat at the economic development table? And now we have that. And so, but it was really challenging them, to do their research and be participants in the process, and not just be someone watching from afar. And that's what you're talking about also.
Having worked both outside and now inside, I think it's harder to do it from inside government. But I think if you can do it, it becomes more successful for two reasons. One, I think that people tend to think of government as like this well-oiled machine, very efficient. It is not really the case. But so there's a higher expectation that they depend on government for services, and they want their government to be performing well for them. But the other thing, at least with CREATE, is that this is public tax dollars. So I don't process a printing invoice without a well-articulated memo justifying that cost, because it's important that people understand how things tie back to our vision and what we're trying to do with CREATE. So I would say that it sometimes can be harder from within government, but I'm part of a nonprofit group that's mission statement is community improvement through collaboration or rogue action. And so that's kind of like that's a release valve for me. And so like an example of that is we had a challenge with our public works department about planting street trees. And so 2 years ago, the nonprofit that I have, Recover Acadiana, we had 30 trees that were 30-gallon, giant, beautiful trees to plant in the public right-of-way. And the day before we were planting them, the carpet got pulled up from under us by the utility company. And so we spent the last 2 years developing a street tree policy for the city to have. So that then we just 3 weeks ago planted the 30 trees finally. And they look beautiful. But the point of that was to push the policy and to be the guinea pig from the private side to push the public policy forward as a good community partner.
Well, I can tell you from my perspective, from being local government, it's not a well-oiled machine, especially in Louisiana. But it's a leadership position as being mayor, and yet the idea is to be able to lead people to what they want to do. And first of all, you have to listen to what they want to do. One of the things is growing up in a small community, we've seemed to have lost our culture. We've seen to things that were important to me as a child, we've seen to have gotten away from. The community atmosphere where everybody knew everybody. Everybody would speak to everybody. Everybody would know the children and watch out for the children. At one time, Abita Springs was a big artist community. Was a big tourist community. But we've seemed to have gotten away from that. We've lost our culture. And we're trying, as leaders, my job, as well as the other elected officials, is to get us back to what our culture is. One of the things we've done is we started a farmer's market, a very big farmer's market now. We had 50-plus vendors. We also added it as an art market. So we have an art and farmer's market. But what it does is the things that I grew up with. Everybody has a farm, and they can bring that produce and sell it. So it allows you to have fresh produce as well as a venue to sell your product, as well as artists. The same thing with artists. We're now in the process of doing an art barn. We acquired a piece of property that is a fallen down tin building. We're going to make an art barn out of it. We're going to have artists come in there and teach art lessons. And that goes from photography to pottery to just about everything. But it's that getting back to our culture that I saw as growing up that I found very important.
So we have a few more minutes left. I'm going to ask one more, and then maybe we have a few minutes for a couple of people in the audience if they have one. So you've all had an idea or an initiative or something you've wanted to start, or you've got these ideas moving, and then you get people on board who have their own ideas. What's the best thing that's kind of like shifted your personal vision of the way things work? As someone come in and said, no, we should do it this way, or I have this idea and that really adds to what you're doing. Is there anything like that you've experienced that's kind of shifted your track?
Yeah, well, like
for better or worse, I mean, you know.
Well, you know, with my background in architecture and urban design, I've been sort of I've had to be the kind of author for the vision of how the community would change, and making the renderings and making the vision tangible for people to see. So like the Berry Fresh Market, you can see in the renderings that it was rendered in with this blue paint, and when it was actually constructed, the paint color changed into this dark green and black, and that was that change came from a kind of dialogue of how getting in touch with African roots and African culture is important, and the symbolism of those colors to the Black community is very important into bringing that in. And it was kind of for me, as a designer, my values were thinking more about, okay, well, I need a light color that's somewhat, sort of attractive, a nice light blue, it's the color of the sky, and then we had people in the community that were representing this thing, and it's sort of like you have to then weigh what's valuable, right? The community is coming up and telling you that this is valuable to their culture, and you say, okay, yeah, I understand, I hear you, and you have that dialogue, and then you find some way to include it, even though it doesn't fit your personal design.
So for me, one of the first events that we started, I guess it was about 15 years ago, was a potluck. We invited folks from the community to bring a covered dish, but being a visual artist, it wasn't just about bringing a covered dish. It was also how to present that dish, right? And so, we had candles, and we had, beautiful flower arrangements, and, the artwork looked all beautiful. And what I noticed as people were coming in from the community, they were walking with their hands behind their backs. Like they were just observing what was going on. They weren't actually part of what was happening. And it was at that moment that I realized that I had to let that pretentious kind of setup go. And that, if people brought something in the dish, a certain dish, that really that didn't make a difference, right? But what started happening was they started bringing styrofoam and aluminum and all of those things. But what that grew into was a recycling program within our organization. So we took that and then expanded on it. But it was really being able to step back and realize that, if I was going to make a difference there, it wasn't about imposing, my views of what the community should look like or how it should be presented, but allow them to have a say in how and what it looks like. Take ownership.
Because that's what you ultimately want to do.
No, it kills me. I'll go in and there's like stuff everywhere, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this just doesn't look good in pictures.
I'm really fascinated just because of our fiber technology and our culture. We laugh about this intersection of culture and technology is kind of where Lafayette finds itself. And so I really am interested in the in technology and how that can provide information and metrics and data for creative industry and parks and recreation. And so, you know, I'm really into kind of that intersection and exploring that. And so I think it's like two things. It's like the proactive things that you're going and like implementing, like the grocery store and like the events and potlucks and things that George is doing and what you're doing. But so much of it is also just like thinking of things with intention and trying to like be in the room when decisions are being made about where things are being placed or how we're going to do this. So like, you know, I have some coworkers in here that are probably like, yeah, why are you in this meeting? It has nothing to do with Create. But to me, it's, you know, it's like being in a room about a new Z card to promote our bus routes. Well, we show the Walmarts, but we don't show any cultural assets. And so like, what a missed opportunity. And so because I'm in there and like making a case for that, those types of things like show up. And so it's part that, but it's also just looking into the sustainability and bringing in extra money that's not already in Lafayette and trying to cannibalize ourselves, but how do we attract more resources and wealth into Lafayette to really move the needle, and that being driven by the metrics and the data that's creating. That's something that I'm really interested in looking at.
When I came home, I'm an electrical engineer by trade. I came home with my mind full of ones and zeros because that's what I was trained for my whole life. And I came back to a small town, and we had a problem with a park. We didn't have one. What we had was a couple broken down swings in a floodplain area. So I got part of a bunch of creative people that really changed my whole perspective. At first, I thought it was a bunch of cats, everybody running off in different directions and talking about different things. And I began to see the value of all those ideas and bringing it all together. And what we did is we created a playground that is outstanding in a very difficult area. There was 300 people built this playground with a material that can be immersed in water, and then it comes back out after the floodplain's over with. We have a fall safe base, which is sand, with a niche base around it, so that doesn't wash away. So when the kids fall off of the things that are there, but this creativity really kind of changed me. It made me think about more than ones and zeros, and more about engineering, more than just projects, more about ROI, and more about the creative of people, and that's what changed me.
Yeah, we're actually looking at, with this asset mapping, seeing where these cultural assets and parks assets are, and making a case for where we invest money. So a couple years ago, I know Joe Minicozzi's been here and Chuck Marone, but we looked at this where in the parish our infrastructure costs outweighed the revenue generated, and that was like bleeding red in the parish, and the places that were generating wealth were, you know, in the black. Very easy to understand. And so we're actually talking with Urban 3 about overlaying that with our cultural mapping, so that and flood maps, so that when we look at where to invest infrastructure, it's like, I believe from an equitable perspective that we have not been investing in the places that are generating enough, like as much economic output through the cultural spectrum. And so it's like, I want to use this information to make a case for reinvesting in those areas that are building our wealth in that way.
Great. Thanks. Since we blew some of our time backstage talking, we kind of went over, but we're going to take one question. Megan, do you have the? So anyone have a question for any of these guys? You get to be the one lucky question asker.
Gay Hamilton, I'm sure you
Before
have a
lunch.
question that would benefit everyone. Come on.
Or we can just have lunch. No?
All right, good.
Does that have any last words?
No, we have
one
a
question.
Question. Okay.
Hi, I have a question for Mayor Lemons. So you said that you had a hard time getting community support, at least at some points during this sustainability promise that your city is wanting to make. So how have you and people in the community changed their minds over time? Are there people that weren't convinced before that have changed their mind, what are those moments when that change in attitude has happened?
Well, we've had a bunch of seminars. We've had a lot of education. We've had a lot of discussion. We tend to put together conversations with folks that allows that change. Most people, unless you get them engaged, are going to go about their life. You have to look for those engagement points. You have to find out what triggers them. You know, if they go home, they come back, they had their kids in school, you really have to get them interested in things. You have to get them interested in the community, and that's how we do this. It's not one thing. It's not one thing. I can't put my finger on one thing and say, hey, this is what we did to do that. But it's a continuous conversation with folks to try to get them engaged in the community, to understand that it is a community. The community is made up of all these people that make it good or bad. And that's the hard part. That is really the hard part. You know, we have a utility system. As long as it works fine, everybody's okay. But if you can't turn on your faucet and get some water, then that's a big deal. So as long as things are running smooth, but you have to get those people engaged, and that's the hardest part, is the engagement of people in the community. You'll have that 10 people that are engaged, but you really need the whole community involved to do that. It's a struggle. It's very much a struggle.
Well, yep.
Just real quick.
Sure, yeah.
So when we started, there was about 20% of the population in Orneville supported what we were doing. I would say that it's about 60 to 70% now. And it's just basically what Mayor Lemons just said. It's like, you know, finding different kind of points of interest where people can come together. I was telling Kate back there earlier that our local church just called us and said, hey, look, can we work with you guys to make a huge rosary? That's not something, I mean, y'all, I should go to church more often, but I don't, right? So the fact that they called me to help make a huge rosary is pretty incredible. But it just goes to show you that that huge demographic now is accepting or is willing to pull us in and work with us. And also at the same time, our local fire department, volunteer fire department, contacted us to work with them on creating a mural. So again, that's another group that we didn't have before, but it took 15 years to get to that point. And it took proving to the community that what we were doing was an asset to them, that they were the beneficiaries of what we were producing. I'll say that one quick thing and I'll stop. But our sales tax has increased by over 40%. And I promise you, the only new industry in Orneville is the creative industries.
That's great.
Thank you. Well, thank you to the four of you. Thank you all. I think the message is go forth and get launched, but then lead.